What is happening, boys and girls? We are in the car park, just about to get into today's session. I'm going to repeat some of the things that I've been thinking about before I play my sessions, and those 4 things are: number 1, I am not going to bluff into my opponent's uncapped range. I'm going to overfold when my opponent bets into my uncapped range. I'm not going to slow play. And lastly, I'm going to be trying my best to pay attention to my opponent's tendencies, so their actions and showdowns, to try to exploit them. Those are the 4 main things I'm going to try to hold myself accountable to. They are the same 4 points that I've been mentioning in my last 2 vlogs. Guys, also, one more thing. If you are following the journey, you're enjoying it, hit the subscribe button, help the channel out. Let's get into the hands. I will see you at the tables. 30 minutes into the session, we are £50 down and get dealt Jack 9 of clubs in the low jack. Our first real playable hand, not a hand that performs quite as well with the straddle on at this stack depth, but I open it anyway. Only the first time playing live poker recreational player on the button cold calls with his £80 stack, and it's not too bad when flop comes free Jack 9 all of spades, giving us top 2. Our position though, I do decide to check, and he checks back. 10 of hearts on the turn, making the board a little more dicey. Time to put money in now to get it all in on the river. I bet 75%. He calls, just needs to be clean. It is with the 6 of diamonds, so we put him all in for only 35% pot. He quickly calls, we show and are good. Moving along to the next hand, there is a low jack raise to a tenner. We are in the cutoff with king queen off. Very happy to squeeze this to £30, and it folds to the small blind who cold calls, and the low jack surprisingly gets out of the way. We are heads up, in position, flop comes 6 king to 2 clubs. He checks, I bet my range for 1/3, and he calls. Turn is the 8 of spades. I don't think this changes much at all. When he checks, I try go for around a 2/3 pot bet. He calls again. 7 of spades on the river, completing the backdoor flush and straight. Importantly, not the front door flush draw though, so I don't think it's much of a concern the way this hand has played out. Despite completing a bunch of draws, after 5 seconds he checks, which I think means he doesn't have a set or 2 bet, which is a bit of a relief. And with him having just over a half pot bet behind, what do you think we should do?
Let's party.
I think going all in is probably the best play. I'm not entirely too sure, to be honest. I decide to just check back, which I do think is maybe a bit too passive.
Helping you achieve understanding.
Person who lacks confidence is irresolute and wishy-washy. Chicken.
I don't know. He shows the same hand and we split the pot. We then raise ace jack off in middle position, cut off and both blinds call. Flop comes king 5-2 spades, checks through, clean ace on the turn. We bet and take it down. 10 minutes later, the super recreational limps low jack with his £150 stack. Now I'm calling him a super recreational because it is literally his first time playing live cash. Now Paul, who was playing pretty tight and is a regular, raises to 10 in middle position, and it folds to us in the small blind as we look down at the big slick. An absolute must squeeze spot. I free bet to 40 quid. The super recreational in super recreational fashion. Limp cold calls our free bet. Now Paul puts in the 4 bet to 120 quid. A pretty annoying spot. We are getting a better price with the super rec being in the pot, but guys, I just don't think we are good here. I just don't. This is either an all-in for the effective £400 stack or a fold. Do I fancy flipping for 200 big blinds versus a range that could easily have us crushed? And flipping at best, no. So I do let it go. Paul does show his kings, and the super rec takes the pot down with ace-6 suited for a rivered gut shot straight. Damn. Fair play though. Wow. We then face a limper and button raise. When we pick up pocket jacks in the small blind, I put in a chunky squeeze and we take it down pre and chip up a little. Now an early position limp from an older gentleman who is capable of a bluff folds to me, and I put in the raise to £10, and we go heads up with the limper to king 7-3 all of spades. He checks, and this is a board which we can bet very small one, especially with the 10 of spades, but then he raises to £25. We only have the 10 high flush draw, so I just make the fold after he shows a 9 high flush. Picking up ace 10 again, this time suited. I raise to 8 from early position. We get 3 callers. Flop is pretty good for our hand though. Ace king 4 rainbow, exceptionally good for our range. So I c-bet out of position and we get 2 calls. Turn brings in the 5 of hearts. I bet 25. Low jack calls again, who I think is pretty tight, so now definitely concerned. But when cutoff raises all in for 157, life is made very easy, and I fold. Low jack called with ace queen and get shown slow played kings by the cutoff. I think a check call or fold strat on the turn would have saved me a lot of cash long term here, as our hand is simply not worth 3 streets. Even 2 streets is debatable, so a big mistake by me. We move. 40 minutes later, it's getting late, almost 2 a.m, and we pick up king 10 suited, 1 limper before us. I raise to 10 and we go 4 ways to 2-3-2 rainbow, a board in which we have the overpair advantage, but multi-way out of position. I do just check and it checks through. The turn is a good one though, the queen of spades giving us a flush draw and a card that hits our range pretty well, checks to me, and I bet 12. Maybe I can make some aces fold. Only the big blind calls. River completes our backdoor flush with the 4 of spades. Let's go. So when he checks, we have a great hand. I bet 50 into 65, but unfortunately he folds rather quickly. I think a 50% pot bet would have been better on this run out to target his queen X as well as lower flushes maybe, or am I being results orientated? We move. 15 minutes later, we pick up ace 3 of hearts. 2 limpers before us. I raise to 12 on the cutoff. Big blind cold calls and the hijack limper calls. Flop is familiar. 2-2-3 with 2 clubs. Checks to us. I think with showdown value, we can just check back here, but I do feel conflicted that there is a high likelihood one of them has a middling pocket pair, and I end up betting a mergey bet around 3rd pot for both value from draws and some information, I guess. Both players call, which is interesting. Turn is the queen of spades. Checks to us again. Looking back, I think this is actually a very good card to barrel on if I want to start turning my hand into a bluff and fold out middling pocket pairs. But I now make a questionable check, which makes me question why I bet the flop. Thankfully, river is a proper good one, saving us with another 3. So when it checks to me for the 3rd time, there is £84 in the pot. I bet 75. Big blind folds, but hijack thinks for 30 seconds before moving all in. I obviously don't think I can fold, so make the call rather quickly, praying we are not cooled. He shows king 3 of spades and it is just chop chop. Next up, we are dealt the TNTs. Cutoff raises to 7, button calls, small blind calls, and we have a squeeze spot. I free bet a chunky 60 quid, which gets the job done. Hijack and cutoff have limped, and we squeeze to £15 with ace king off. It is a little concerning now when a tight OMC min clicks to £30 in the small blind, and I decide to just make the call in position. Flop comes 3-4 king 2 spades. He checks, and as I'm not the pre-flop aggressor, I just check it back. 2 of diamonds. I don't think this player will ever have ace 5, so I think of this as a brick. Now he bets out 50 into 66. I just call to keep his bluffs in. River is the 6 of spades, and when he checks, I think we are most certainly good, but Phil, we will really struggle to get paid off from this player. I check it back and he shows queens. I do think exploitatively, maybe I could have bet small, as this player will rarely raise here, but doubt he will pay us off anyway. Table breaks after this hand and we end the session there, cashing out for a 55 quid profit. We start session 2 at 3:18 p.m, very early for our standards. A recreational ABC type player opens from early position to £7, folds to us on the button with ace-9 suited. I think I could call, raise or even fold here. I decide to raise it to £21 and he calls. Flop comes 3-3-8 to diamonds. Checks to us and it is a board where we have the overpair advantage with a hand that has 2 overs, so I bet third pot and he calls. Turn is the 6 of hearts, no help, and so when he checks, I just check back our ace high showdown value. River is nice though, the 9 of diamonds, and now interestingly, villain leads out for a tiny £20 bet into 75. I don't think we can raise. I call, he shows the same hand.
You're playing each piece like losing it hurts. This ain't checkers.
15 minutes later, we superpost to rejoin the game in the cutoff and get dealt ace king, raise it, and moving on. We get given queen 10 of diamonds. There is one limper before us from early position. I raise to 10 from low jack. Cutoff calls, who is a competent player, and the small blind and limper tag along as well. Flop comes king jack 7 to clubs, giving us an open-ended straight draw. Checks to us. I bet small and only the cutoff behind us calls, who is the competent player. We go to a juicy dicey turn, which is the 8 of clubs, bringing in a bunch of draws. This card is definitely better for our opponent, but I decide to continue to look strong and bet half pot because I think this double barrel will apply a ton of pressure on pocket pairs and could even fold a hand like ace jack without a club. He thinks for about 30 seconds before letting it go. Do I like my turn bet here though? I don't. I think it was the first mistake of the session and I should have just slowed down and checked to see what he wants to do and go from there. Anyway, luckily it worked out. Next up, we pick up ace queen of hearts on the button. I raised the 2 limpers before us to £15 and both limpers call. Flop comes 8-5-7 rainbow. Checks to me and on this board I just check back. Turn is the ace of spades, and very interestingly, our pal SB, who is a competent player, leads into us for £25. I find this move to be very strong. When we hold a ton of aces in our range, I just don't think I can fold just yet though, so I call and we go heads up to the river, which is the queen of clubs. Let's go. Now he bets just over half pot. I think calling is probably best, but let me know if you would raise here. I swiftly make the call.
River 2 bet?
Yeah.
I knew you river 2 bet. Just had it. You win.
We open queen 9 off next on the button, get a free bet from the small blind and fold. Next up, straddle is on, early position has opened and we have aces. I free bet to £45 and we unfortunately take this one down pretty. We then open ace jack off in the hijack. The recreational player next to act calls and the big blind calls. Flop is jack 10-2. I check and it checks through. 8 of clubs on the turn. Big blind checks to me. Now I bet 15 and only the recreational next to act calls. River is the queen of clubs. Not a great card, so I check. He leads out for 30 now. I just don't think we are good. I think this rec would just call with king, queen, ace, queen pre-flop. Has a bunch of 2 pairs, not to mention the backdoor flush, so I do fold. We then free bet ace, king pre-flop. Take it down. And we pick up ace king again. There is an under the gun open to £8. I raise it to 24 in the low jack and we go heads up to jack queen 8 rainbow. We have 2 overs and a gut shot to the nuts, so when he checks I c bet 1/3 and he calls. Turn is the 2 of clubs, a complete brick. He checks it over and now I decide to slow down and check. River is another brick, 5 of clubs. He checks it to us again, and now I think I have showdown value with ace king, so I check it back. He shows pocket 10s, and I slowly come to the realization that I played this hand a little too passively, or more like far too passively, especially after speaking to some better poker players than myself. We simply have a great hand to barrel with on the turn to get our opponents off a hand exactly like pocket 10s or jack X, but passive play has cost me once again. Not too long after, we 3-bet squeeze with king queen out of the small blind after the low jack has limped the straddle. Only the low jack calls, who looks to be a tight recreational player, and we go heads up to the flop knowing his range is capped after limping. Flop comes 6 king 8, a lovely flop. I decide to c-bet my range and he calls. Turn is the 5 of hearts. I don't mind slowing down now to both see what my opponent wants to do and also get more value on the river from worse hands. He does decide to check it back, and when the river brings in another 6, I bet out 50% pot. He thinks for about 30 seconds before throwing in a chip in my direction. Somewhat reluctantly, we let him know the bad news and take it down. We then go on to play a few smaller pots, first opening ace-5 suited, checking it down to showdown and lose. Then 3-bet squeeze ace-jack off, pre-flop and win. Lastly, get pushed off 7. Before picking up pocket 10s in early position, I raise it to 10. We get calls from the low jack and small blind. Flop is okay. 3-8 jack 2 hearts. I think we should still have the best hand most of the time here, but being out of position, when it checks to me, I check it over to the recreational in the low jack, who checks it back. Turn is the 9 of clubs, giving us the open-ended straight draw. Checks to us again, and after low jack checked the flop, I think we are definitely good to bet for value here. I bet 20 into 32, and only the recreational calls. River is not great at all. It is the ace of clubs. I check, feeling like low jack will have a bunch of ace-x in his range, but he checks it back, and we are good. We have been playing for 4 hours. I decide this will be my last orbit, and we get dealt pocket queens. I raise to £10, only the big blind calls. Flop is dreadful for our hand at least. Ace king 7 2 spades. He checks, and I just decide to c-bet my range. He folds, and now we wrap up for real what's been a decent session.